everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet. This is Ken Weeb from Sportsnet. Together we are Kenny and Renny, and this is our weekly long-form show where we're going to welcome in the guy that, Ken, I don't know if you've heard this one before, but the guys I talk to in the industry like to refer to John as the godfather of Hockey Night in Canada. I love that name. People will know him, though, a little more with a local flair because he's been doing pre-games on Winnipeg Jets shows on CJOB for quite a while now. I have the honor of sharing some of those shows with him. It's always a good time when he pops up in there. And I think you'll probably notice we're dressed up in green since it's St. Patrick's Day. With a name like Reynolds, it means something to me. You know, it's part of the family. In fact, my kids said they wanted to have like a true to form kind of Irish celebration here tonight. So right upstairs as we speak, Ken, I'm cooking steak and Guinness pie. Now the way it goes, I'm the cook in the house. I don't know about you, but the wife is not exactly. I know in gardening it's called the green thumb. If cooking was gardening, she would not have the green thumb. I have to leave very specific instructions. So there's about to be a timer that goes on. She's got to add the mushrooms in there, and then she's got to cook it low and slow for an hour to tenderize that steak. In fact, I think I hear her walking over there to take care of it right now.
You better be careful.
Handle it. But I'm also thinking that maybe our guy here, John Shannon, with a name like Shannon, probably, maybe, just maybe, St. Patrick's Day means something to him. When you're handling you know who the true pros are on this show, Ken, because in our green room, fittingly for St. Patrick's Day, we've given them a specific instructions to show up about 5 minutes into the show, but the really prepared ones always show up early. And we went live here just a couple seconds after 3 o'clock, and John popped up into our green room. So let's not waste any more time and bring him into the show here. Great to have John Shannon join us. John, Shannon sounds like an Irish name to me. Does this day mean anything to you?
It is an Irish name. I can tell you right now, my grade 3 teacher used to tell me that the mouth of the Shannon is 50 miles wide, so you better be quiet. The River Shannon is the longest river in Ireland, actually in the British Isles. My father was born in Vancouver, but actually moved back to Belfast as a 3-year-old. And actually to a suburb of Belfast called Coleraine. So we had many stories about Northern Ireland and Coleraine at our house. But St. Patrick's Day was just a good day to have a beer, right?
Yeah. Well,
I loved going to Chicago. Always tried to be in Chicago this week when they could paint the river green. And Chicago's the best Irish party town I've ever been in.
Really? Yeah, they do it well there. You got to be. It's interesting because I mean we know that there's a really strong Polish community there as well. But I always find it fascinating, like we do here in Winnipeg with our Ukrainian community and just north the highway, the Icelandic community. When you go to Gimli, I've always admired those communities that kind of hold on to the traditions and really replicate them from the old world to the new world. And you are definitely right. Chicago does an absolutely.
By the way, I'm mad at Kenny wearing his Masters golf. I mean, come on.
Why? What's
just around the corner? Just around the corner.
Way to rub it in. That's all
John,
I'm saying. Way to rub it in.
It's not rubbing it in. I've only been on the property once, and I didn't even get to see the whole property because there was a massive storm on site. So I haven't even been to Amen Corner. But I played golf in Arizona the last couple weeks, so I was feeling good. Had to get it out. It's one of the few green shirts that I have.
So, John, we dug into a little bit of your heritage, but we're interested in what we do on this show is kind of dig into our guests and kind of get an idea of their motivations, you know, the reasons they've done the things that they've done, kind of show people the people who are making the news behind the scenes. I'm interested in, just kind of you growing up, how you kind of trended towards sports. Was it a household that trended in that direction, or how did you find that?
Oh, no. We were a sports family. I have 2 older brothers. They were much better athletes than I was. But our parents were. I grew up in the interior of British Columbia, as Kenny knows, because we played one of my favorite golf courses in my hometown, Fairview Mountain, one of the great secrets of golf in our country. And we watched and participated in everything all the time, from golf to football to hockey to basketball. My hometown was a basketball town. We didn't have an arena, so we were really like March Madness at our house. Even when it was a 16 team and a 32 team tournament was electric at this time of year. Loved all the sports. Our parents encouraged us to be involved. We lived and died. We were in a one channel town when I was a little boy. CBC, that was all we got. So the only sports we got was the CFL and Hockey Night in Canada. So you lived and died with the radio. And in the Okanagan Valley in the wintertime, AM radio waves go a long way. And so you could listen to Los Angeles radio and San Francisco radio and Portland and Seattle and Vancouver. So you got big league sports all the time. And it became part of your imagination at nighttime was listening to Chick Hearn or listening to Jigs McDonald with the Kings or Bill King with the Warriors. It was just a magical time to grow up as a kid. And that's how we became sports fans.
How about you? I mean, how did you become drawn to the media aspect of that, John? I mean, were you a guy who delivered the paper, or I mean, when did you first, or maybe avid? I know you're an avid reader, but were you a newspaper guy also, or?
We had the hockey news, and we have a subscription to the hockey news and the sporting news, and even though if they came 10 days late, they were still read cover to cover. But in many ways, I was a product of being a guy that just loved television. It was magical. In the 60s, it was amazing to be able to sit and I did wonder how they did things. What did they do? So I got my interest got piqued rather in a strange way. My older brother Ross wrote away to the Columbia School of Broadcasting for one of their brochures, and my parents bought him a tape recorder, and within about 6 months he had lost interest in the tape recorder, and I loved it. And I wanted to be an announcer. I wanted to do. At the age of 9, I wanted to be an announcer. And so when push came to shove, when I graduated high school, I said, my parents, both of them said, "Well, we want you to be a lawyer." And I said, "There's no chance I'm being a lawyer, but I want to go to a broadcast school. I want to go into broadcasting." So my father, who was the principal of the high school I went to, said, "Okay, fly to Vancouver." This is before the internet. This is before anything. Fly to Vancouver, visit your brother at University of British Columbia, go to the library, and then remember the catalogs for universities, all the books after books, and you could go in and check the courses. So I sat for a day, and the UBC Stacks had every catalog for every university in North America. And I went and found 3 universities that offered degrees in broadcasting. Syracuse University, Washington State, in Cheney, Washington, not far from where I lived, or Ryerson in Toronto. And being out of country for 2 of them, Washington State was $17,000 a year, Syracuse was $30,000 a year, and Ryerson was $900. So I finished. I said, "Well, and this school in Toronto is $900, and my dad says you're going to love Toronto." So then as a 17 or 18-year-old, I moved to Toronto and got a degree in broadcasting at Ryerson. Hockey Night in Canada's offices were around the corner. I did a project on Hockey Night in Canada, parked myself in the lobby for about 50 straight days. And after about the 60th day, they decided, well, does he work here? And so they hired me. So and I've been doing this business ever since. I wrote my final exam, I think in May 1st or 2nd of 1978, and on May the 3rd, I was in New York, an associate producer for Hockey Night in Canada, doing a playoff game.
I'm a Ryerson alum myself. It definitely didn't cost $900 a year to go there by the time I was rolling in there. But before we get into this, because you've given us a great segue into where you started, but I want to just back things up, because you talked about your dad wanting you to be a lawyer, and then you tell him that's not the way it was going to happen. We've done a lot of guys in this show who you've worked alongside. Jim Hewson comes to mind, Scott Oak comes to mind, who had these stories of their parents, wanting them to go in a direction. Scott was supposed to be a doctor. Jim, had gone to school to become an actor, and his mom was so upset with him choosing a different path that he remembers distinctly, and it being a really motivating factor in his life. Her grabbing his picture and turning it towards the wall because she couldn't look at him. She was so upset that he'd gone in a different direction. I know that my dad, I was supposed to be a phys ed teacher, the same as my dad. Both my parents were educators. And when I decided that wasn't for me, I went in a different direction. There was a little bit, of him being upset and thinking I was taking the wrong path. How did your dad handle it, and his response to you going in a different direction than he had envisioned for you? Was that a motivating factor for you at all?
No, not at all. I mean, they were very supportive. What I would tell you in that day and age, though, is that there was no question I was leaving the house. You graduate high school in June. Where are you going to be living in September? Because you're not living here anymore. You are going out to start your life. That was part of the routine. Was that? And by the way, I'm the only member of my family, Sean, that isn't a teacher.
Interesting. Me too. My sister became a teacher as well.
Both my brothers are retired now, but were teachers, and my mom and dad were both teachers. So, they were fully supportive, and to the point where they got excited once they realized where I was, who I was doing it with, and they could see me every Saturday. It was magical.
Yeah.
Yeah, what were some of those early years like, John? Like you said, you kind of forced them into hiring you, but then you did a nice job of sticking around and moving to some pretty fun places. But what were those early years like, and who were some of your big influences that you got to learn from in those early days at Hockey Night?
Well, I mean, the driving force of the show at that point was Ralph Mellenby, who just passed away recently, and Ralph was a huge influence on all of us because Ralph was bombastic. Ralph was confident. Ralph was good, and so every day you went to work, you didn't want to let Ralph down. You learned, and Ralph was loyal too. You could have made the worst mistake in the history of broadcasting, and he would have had your back. Now, behind closed doors, he would have given you shit, but at the same time, publicly and optically, he would have been your biggest supporter. So, and he was creative, and he knew the game. So he was the standard that we all lived by for so many years. And then the biggest influences I think I had were not necessarily people in production, but were announcers. I mean, Dave Hodge was and still is a great friend. Was a huge influence on me because he taught me to prepare, to be prepared. Dan Kelly, the great voice of the St. Louis Blues, who became a friend for many years, all he did was demand perfection. That's all it was just be great every day. Okay, we'll do that. Don't screw up, but be great and want to be great. But the guys like that made it fun too. So it did become a band of brothers every day on the road. There were no studio shows in those days. So we did everything from the road. From the first game in September to the last game in May, we were always on the road. The host was there with his expert, with his analyst, and they became your family for so much of the season. I used to tell people one of the great prides I had in working in the 80s was that I could literally drive across the country and stop in any city in any big city in both countries and be able to stay with a friend. And that's what it was all about. And in many ways it still is. For me it is that you go. I'm in Edmonton right now, and there isn't a time that you say, well, I'm here. So somebody says, well, let's go out and let's go and have a coffee, or let's do this and that. And it's all. This is a people business. It's all about people and the ability to tell a story. And so if you can create relationships and tell stories, then you're going to be successful, whether you're on camera or whether you're behind the scenes.
I appreciate that you brought up Dan Kelly and Dave Hodge, because part of you are a character in sports media, hockey media, that has a lot of mythology about you. And one of the things that kind of creates
That's very
that mythology.
nice. That's a nice way of saying it.
Well, here I think it's an earned. I think it's an earned word. I don't think I'm blowing smoke here. I think it's earned. Yeah, you talked about kind of forcing CBC to hire you, and that doesn't surprise.
Not
Sorry.
CBC. Hockey Night in Canada.
Hockey Night in Canada.
It was a separate company then.
Sure. Okay. So
in the old day, the old company owned by McLaren Advertising.
There we go. So you forced Hockey Night in Canada to hire you. That's, some people would say that's brash for a young man to come in and force his way in the way you did. But one of the things that I go back to the word mythology about you is that you walked out a very young man, a protege in a young industry. And when you were dealing with the likes of Dan Kelly and Dave Hodge, established guys that you really looked up to, you still were able to push and ride them. This is what I'm told about. Clearly, I wasn't there, but you walked in with the intention of, the feeling that you could make them better and not being afraid to push them to be better in the position that you were in. Where does that brashness come from at that age to be able to push people that are, not just established, but your heroes?
We were taught to speak up. We were at the dinner table. We were taught to have an opinion every night. The words, my parents, and actually I get emotional about it because my parents taught us never say, I don't know. I don't know were words we're not allowed at our dinner table. Have an opinion. Speak up. Politics, life, women, entertainment, whatever you do, have an opinion. So that has put me in really good stead in our business, whether it be behind the scenes or in the last 10 or 12 years in front of the camera or on the radio. If somebody says, well, we have to talk for 10 minutes. No problem. No problem. We can talk for 10 minutes. And would you like to script it? Not a chance. I don't want to script it. I'm better and more effective having a conversation. And guys like Hodge and Kelly would appreciate that because you had to prepare to have that conversation. You had to live the life. I mean, we I don't want to call them sacrifices, but we were hockey and television 24/7 from the age of 18 to the age of 35. 24/7, 365. No social life other than with the guys around the show. And I mean, you never felt you had a job. You never felt you had a job. This was a lifestyle. This was playing in the sandbox with grown-ups. It was fantastic. Being a guy, I went from being a guy who produced the Stanley Cup final at the age of 23 to being the young gun producer. Now I'm the old geezer. And now it's 45 years in the business for me. And I don't really remember anything in between. It's either 23 or 66. So, but have an opinion. If you sit and have an opinion and you ask questions, then people will respect you. What Hodge taught me was, so in the old days, Sean, I don't know what happens at Hockey Night or at Rogers anymore, but everything had to be, we had scripts. We called them scripts, but they were show formats. First page show opening, and here's the things we're going to talk about, and the first intermission, another page. So one of my first shows I did with Dave Hodge, and it was a really tough lesson to learn. In late in 78, we were having our production meeting, and went to the second intermission. In the bottom of the second intermission, I had left a blank. Dave does, and then left a blank. And that meant to Hodge, I hadn't thought enough about the show. And he told me, well, we're going to do this then. Well, I said, he says, no, I'm doing it. And I learned that day that if I don't come prepared with every item and give this show enough thought, he will try to produce the show. Well, yeah. I was the producer, not him. And I learned it that day, and I've never forgotten it. And that was 1978.
John, you talked about the dinner table. I've been fortunate to be around a dinner table with you at the Young Stars tournament in Penticton, where you taught me a little bit about red wine from Oliver, and I
Sure.
remember a lot of those storytelling days. Is there a concern that some of that stuff isn't going to get passed down because the social element maybe isn't the same as it was even 5 years ago because of the pandemic, or are you confident that these things will continue to happen? Because I mean, for me, just getting out on this last road trip, the value in being around dinner tables with your buddies in those other markets, man, it was a great reminder of what we've been missing during the pandemic here.
I think it will slowly come back. Um, but like the evolution of your old business, Ken, the evolution of newspapers, how the world has changed. Newspapers now realize that a writer can write about a game and see a Zoom interview after it from his family room rather than traveling on the road. But you still have a bit of contact with your home games. Those are the concerns. The costs of things are going to be a concern. And what's also then going to be missing in all of this is the interaction with people, with the athletes, like dressing room access, to be able to sit down with Leon Draisaitl or Connor McDavid and say, "Hey, what's happening? What's going on? How's your dog?" And be able to humanize these guys as an entertainment factor for the viewers, for the fans, as opposed to being at a distance with them. And that there's certainly a concern, but I do think it will come back eventually. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I do think it'll come back.
We have to come back to this topic because you are very well known for the relationships that you've created behind the scenes with very important people in hockey. We have to come back to that. I want to go back to that theme you talked about with your parents about having to have an opinion or being required. That was being part of the Shannon family. That was something. And it doesn't surprise me because I find mostly teachers are people who want to have a say in what happens in the world. They do that through their work in educating kids, but that is something that is important to them. In the way the world is trending right now with social media, that often beats down people who have outlying opinions, and I'm wondering thoughts that you have or advice that you may have for people in the business who you would like to see have an opinion because it makes the business a better place, but having to deal with it in an age where your opinions can be dangerous to the point that you can lose your job in a heartbeat if the wrong opinion is given.
Well, let me ask both of you as part of the response is, like, I need to know what you guys think of the National Hockey League, the Winnipeg Jets, and the 31 other teams. That's what I think I need to know from you guys. Mm-hmm. I don't care what you think about Justin Trudeau. I don't care, and I don't really want to follow you. And that's the great the way social media can work. So if you cross the line into something that, well, that's not what I'm doing following you, then I'll just stop following you. Mm-hmm. And so I think people tend to take themselves too seriously, and think that they're talking directly to people and then they can have influence. And I've given this a lot of thought for my own. I'm on Twitter, but I only talk hockey on Twitter. I never go and talk. I may say, please go vote, as all Canadians, please go vote. But I will never take a political stand on Twitter because I don't think people follow me for that. I think people follow me to hear my stories about hockey. And my title on Twitter is a hockey storyteller. So why would I think that they really care if I don't like truckers? Why would they care? And so you're asking for trouble by doing it. So be smart about it. Deliver the goods of what you're expected to do, and you don't have to go any farther. Now, if the three of us were sitting over a glass of red wine from Oliver, our discussion might get quite vocal and volatile, and we talk about it, but that'll be a private conversation. That's not for public consumption, which I think Twitter is. It's for public consumption.
Now, before we move on, Ken, I just wanted to get a quick re-ask on this because I want to make sure that I get this topic squared away. It does seem in this world, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is what I've been told. It seems I can feel the business trending in that direction. But the power dynamic between the media and the big leagues has shifted somewhat in years past. I think it's definitely different than the way it was when you first came in. So there is danger to your point. And if you want to know my opinion on the Jets, my opinion on the NHL and the other 31 teams, there is, guys have lost positions with teams because they shared too strong of an opinion, and the owners of that team or the people behind that team aren't happy that those opinions were expressed. We know those people. I won't name them, but I'm sure you can think of a lot more people than me who've lost their positions because of sharing too strongly an opinion. So I'm wondering about your advice of finding the balance between being critical of teams and doing so to the point, or not doing so to the point that it may be detrimental to the access that person gets, or the positions that they hold.
My advice is to be fair. And you can be fair with opinion. But you don't have to be vitriolic. You don't have to be bitter. You don't have to be critical. Be fair. Now, this whole storyline, Sean, is not new. I mean, baseball, the play-by-play announcer for radio and television for baseball has been an employee of the club since 1935. This is nothing new. What happened over the years was the power of our business, particularly television, became so important to get messaging out. The networks or the leagues started to realize that they can talk better directly to the fan if they control the content, and they can get the right messaging out. Which, by the way, speaks to the importance of an independent media and speaks to the importance of newspapers, all in the way they should be done. It should be done, but there's a way to work for a partner. Sportsnet's a partner. TSN's a partner for the Jets. There's a way to do it and still be critical as long as you're fair. But you have to think about it, and you have to talk your way through it. I mean, I'm sure there are nights that Kevin and Dennis are really angry at the Jets and really want to rip them, but they're a partner. So you have to find a way to finesse that content and still maintain your own personal integrity, that I spoke my mind, but I was fair to the process, and I was fair to the fan, and I was fair to the team. And that's what I do think. That's the one thing that I think organizations and leagues actually understand, that because they don't want to be, not most teams, 95% of teams in all the leagues want to create the belief that person is an independent thinker and can say the right thing, but just be fair. So I did 11 years on Sportsnet, doing primarily the three Western teams, the rights that they owned: Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver. We had Ottawa, Montreal for a while, and I would get critical on the air. And in 11 years, because I think if I was going to be critical, I would phone somebody and say, "Hey, listen, here's what I'm going to say. Here's what I'm going to say. Tell me I'm wrong." And they would say, "Well, you're not wrong, but here's what our thinking is." I said, "Okay, that's fair." So I could go on the air and say, "By the way, the organization thought they were supposed to be doing this, but they didn't do it right. And here's what they need to do. And here's whether it's a player, whether it's what blah blah, whatever it was." And not once in 11 years did somebody phone back and say that was really a cheap shot. Not once. Because it's like the old days in journalism. I've got a scoop, and I'm going to phone the guy ahead of time and say, "I'd like your comment, but this is what I'm going to say tomorrow." And if you talk to people and create relationships with people, you will be given latitude, because they'll say at least he gave me a chance to rebut. He was fair. He wasn't vicious. You can still do that and work for a team or work for a partner, and have a successful career.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there, John. The fairness is a big thing, and to me, with all the advancement of social media, I think don't make it a personal attack, right? I mean, that to me, that's always a rule to go by. I mean, you can point out a guy is making a mistake, but that doesn't make him a bad player, or So to me, it's all in how you frame it. I am encouraged by the fact that MLB is allowing reporters back into the clubhouse for the first time. I think that is a good way to go. But it'll be interesting to see how long it takes for the NHL to get back to that point. But
well, the NBA has already said they're not going to do it, at least for the remainder of the season and the playoffs.
Well, and we also know that the NHL often takes their cues, right? Given the relationship at head office. So, I mean, hopefully, also there's been a strengthening of the relationship with MLB with the BAM and everything else. So let's hope that is the case as well. But when it comes, you touched on the storytelling element, John. I'm curious for your thoughts on what makes a good storyteller and how do those storytellers stay sharp?
Well, that's when your phone bill goes up. That's when you end up saying, "Well, there's a flicker of a story here." So I'll just to give you, I said I'm in Edmonton. I'm working on the Sportsnet broadcast for the next 2 or 3 nights. This is the first bunch of games that I've done here since Jay Woodcroft took over, and Jay's a really nice guy. He looks about 14. He's 45. He's actually 4 years older than Sheldon Keith, if you believe it. Sheldon looks about 10 years older. That might be the difference in coaching in Bakersfield rather than Toronto. So I ended up phoning Jay and saying, "Hey, listen, can I come over and have a coffee?" And he was kind enough to sit down and have a coffee with me. And what started was going to be 10 minutes ended up being 2 hours. And he told me a story about he was the video coach when the Detroit Red Wings lost here in Edmonton in Steve Yzerman's last game. Oh, really? Yeah. And he says, there's a famous picture in Detroit of Yzerman stepping off ice with the title "Last Step" or "The Last Step" that Steve autographed for a bunch of us and gave them to us as a gift after he retired. Ooh. All of a sudden, that's the genesis of a 90-second story about how the relationship that Jay Woodcroft started as the video coach in Detroit, working for Babcock, McClellan, and Paul McLean. All 4 guys ended up being head coaches in the National Hockey League now. So you sit there and you say, okay, so that's a good story, but what makes this guy tick? So let's phone Mike Babcock. So I texted Mike and I said, "Listen, what makes Jay Woodcroft a good coach?" Next thing you know, my phone's ringing. It's Mike, who's on the first tee at a golf course in Palm Springs, California, saying, "I got 5 minutes to talk before I tee off." Told me a couple of Jay Woodcroft stories. He says, "But the guy you should talk to is Hitchcock, because he's really helped him in Bakersfield." I said, "Okay." Phone Hitch. 40 minutes later, there's and we're only going to have 90 seconds to tell the story anyway. But you now have context and breadth of one little thing that came out of him saying, "I have a picture of Steve Yzerman that he autographed when he left the game." And you just have to keep constantly thinking. I mean, I don't envy guys like you, Ken, that have to come up with storylines every week with the same club. It's hard, and how many times can you write, "Has Mark Scheifele lost the fire?" When will Ehlers be back? I do it, as you guys both know, I do that commentary every Friday morning on CGOB. At about 9:00 Thursday night, I have no clue because I said that last week and I said it the week before. And so how do you try to keep it fresh? You really just have to think a lot about it, and then you have to use your life experiences and your phone book and go from there.
It's one of the things that's interesting about covering hockey. Sometimes a really good team can be boring to cover because they're consistent, right? Yeah. They do the same things over and over again. They get the same kind of effort from every player. So you're talking about the same thing week after week because they're doing the same thing week after week, and that's why they're succeeding. I want to take this in a bit of a different direction. Have you ever seen the movie Whiplash before, John?
No.
Okay, phenomenal film. J.K. Simmons won an Oscar for it. It's about this teacher at a high-level school for
I love J.K.
musicians.
Simmons, by the way.
Yeah.
I love J.K. Simmons.
Well, he's phenomenal in this role. And so he's a conductor. And the movie is all about the examination of the ethics of pushing really talented people out of their comfort zone. Does this ring a bell to you?
I understand. I know the premise of the movie, but I haven't seen the movie.
You have to see it, because when people tell me about you, I think of this movie, because I think it's, again, to the mythology of John Shannon, is that he pushed people really, really, really hard during his career. And you talked about it earlier on. From your heroes, you learned that all they demanded was, perfection, right? Or being very, very good. It seems like from the stories that I've heard, it seems like you took that and you ran with that. I'm interested in you and how you found the balance between demanding things to the point that it really took people out of their comfort zone, but still maintaining those relationships which you have and which you talk about being so important, and finding that line, not going too far, or maybe going over it every once in a while, but being able to maintain once you did.
No, I went over the line. I don't. I would be silly. I would be silly to think that I didn't push people too hard at times. But this was my life. This wasn't my job. This was my life. Wasn't married. Driven to be the best. Wanted every day to be the best. Very fortunate. My second year producing, we had a staff meeting in Toronto, and they said, does anybody want to move to Calgary to produce the Oilers, Canucks, Jets, and Flames? One guy put his hand up. And think about it. I got the 80s in Alberta.
Yeah. Wow.
And on the off season that an Alberta team didn't make the playoff, make the Stanley Cup final, the Vancouver Canucks did. So that was the greatest training ground of all time. But I lived it constantly. So my frustration with people was always that I believed I always gave my best. I was always prepared. Why aren't you? My anger sometimes was at myself, because maybe I didn't think I was prepared enough, or I didn't know the right thing at the right time, and it would be perceived that I was angry at them. And that's, as a leader, and I've learned this, as a leader, that was a mistake. As a leader, like I would be hard on myself now watching John Shannon in 1983. I would have said, hey, come over here, kid. Don't do that. I've learned that. I don't think I've stopped learning, to be honest. I think that I think I'd be a better producer today than I was then, even though I'd have 10 times more energy and pace. But now I see the game slower. Now I see life slower. And I think, and I've also, just to not to get too heavy here, Sean, but what I've also done is that I've also walked into scenarios in the last 15 years, and I can sit there and say nothing to people, and they think I'm mad. Hi, how you doing? Oh, he was aloof. It's not fair. It's not fair to me, but it's a reality of what has been created over the years. So from that perspective, and the irony of that is when you talk to people that are the guys that have gone through the wars with me, and I probably not fair to use the word wars anymore, but through the events that we have in television, those people are loyal and diehard friends to this day, because we made each other better, and in the end we became so bonded that it's the old Fred Sherrill line: "Win tonight, and we'll live together forever." Right? So, and they took it. Now I have a really good ability, and my wife says it's because I'm on the spectrum a bit. She said, because I can get really mad, and say something. I don't do it anymore, but in those days I get really mad, and then 3 minutes later forget about it. And what I didn't realize, and it took me a decade or a decade and a half to realize, is that that person lived with that for a week, and I hurt them for a week, and that affected me in the 90s so much that as I got other jobs, I got better at it.
Yeah.
John, you touched on Winnipeg. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be at the second whiteout game with my dad. I mean, what do you remember about those days? And what's the biggest thing you learned about the Jets during that time that maybe isn't as well known as some of the other stories?
I actually was in Pittsburgh for the first Jets game in Winnipeg 1.0. It was a Pittsburgh at Winnipeg, or Winnipeg at Pittsburgh was the first game. It was a Wednesday night game that we talked about. Ralph Mallomy and I went to Pittsburgh and produced the game for CKND. So I did a lot of Jets games in the early days out of the old bread truck at the back of the Winnipeg Arena with Brian Swain and Pitt Martin. Andy Arnott was one of our hosts. Then when we moved the rights to CKY, and 22-year-old little Roddy Black was our host, and so I have fond memories of being in Winnipeg all those years. And when the team left, I was the executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada, and the whiteout was something, and I still remember to this day. In that playoff series against Detroit. And this was maybe I'm overstepping it, but this was the power of Hockey Night in those days. Whitman was doing the play-by-play. The late great Doug Sellers, who went to the U.S. with Fox, was our producer for that series out there. And between games 4 and 5, game 5 was in Winnipeg, right? I've just got to remember my games right. The Red Wings Jets. I phoned Grapes at home and said, "Hey Don, tomorrow might be the last game in Winnipeg ever. You have to be there." "What do you mean?" "I got to be in the studio." I said, No. You've got to go to Winnipeg. So, and we thought it was important for our show to be, because the Jets were great to us. The fans in the old arena were just as loud as the fans in the new arena. We thought it was important for us to put a stamp on that, on that organization and be there as long as we could. But that was also my real appreciation and love of the teams in Western Canada, which I think it hasn't been lost, but I think there's so much attention now put on Toronto, because Saturday night at 7:00 is always Toronto, that we've forgotten at times the Western teams.
Yeah. I'm really interested in your thoughts on this one. I've actually pondered it for a long time. So you talked about being a young man watching Hockey Night in Canada, and I think you described it as being magical. I agree with you. Absolutely. So you walk into the industry, and then you get to it. And we've talked with a lot of different people on this show. I remember my moment the first time I was on Hockey Night in Canada. Like, you are shaking because you are landing in a place that is, magical, legendary towards you. All of these years later, after you stepped onto that program, people inside, outside the industry talk about how innovative you were to that show and to the industry. I'm interested in how much thought you put in trying to find the balance of innovating and changing while still maintaining the legacy and the magic of what that program was and hopefully has always been.
Well, it's a really important thing to remember is when I went back in '94 to be the executive producer, we made subtle change constantly. Mm-hmm. We never stopped changing it, to the point where by the end of the third year, everybody said, "Well, it was always this way." Well, it wasn't always this way, because we made those changes only in the last 18 months. When I do public speaking and people ask that question, I always say, listen, we live in a country for the longest time had a party called the Progressive Conservatives. Well, think about it. A progressive conservative, how does that happen? That's jumbo shrimp. And that's what but Hockey Night in Canada in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was the greatest example of progressive conservatism on television. It really was, because there was this expectation. Well, there's the music, and there's Sean, God bless you, you got your baby blue behind you. Those were important things. Those were constants. those became that was branding before there was branding. But the show constantly changed. There was always thinking of what to make better, what to be more innovative with, and to that point, we always, and this is where I kind of think differently than a few people in our industry. When we hire announcers, we tend to hire former hockey players now. Well, former hockey players know how to talk to hockey players. They don't know how to talk to the public. And I think my strength of being that communicator and in programming the show was that I was a viewer. And I knew what I liked as a viewer. And if I liked it as a viewer, I can guarantee you most people would like it too. And I could talk to a viewer as a viewer, not a hockey player to a viewer. Because the hockey player he can't lower himself to that level because he knows the game too well. It's real people. In my mind, in the history of Hockey Night in Canada, the best announcer in the history of the game, the most complex, the deepest, the great, never played the game at a professional level, and that was Dick Irvin. Because Dick could do everything. And Dick could put it in terms that the guy at home could understand. And in the end, that's what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be us talking about F1 in deep and active sticks and gap control and all this crap. It's supposed to be saying, hey, guy, here's a game on. Here's what's happening. Here's why it's happening. And by the way, pop another beer, enjoy yourself, and we'll watch the next period together. Yeah. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what we're supposed to be doing. That's been, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but our business has lost that. Our business has lost that because we've thought people want to be too technical. People don't want technical. People want fun. They want to be entertained. They want to be educated, but they don't. How many people? So we have a country of, two quick stories. We have a country of 35 million people. So how many people play hockey?
2 million?
Less.
Really?
Less.
A million? A million?
More than just over 1 million registered hockey players in the country.
Wow. That's
so
surprising.
Think about it. What are the other 34 million thinking they know?
Yeah.
And the other thing was, we always used to joke when, in those days, Canada was about 28 or 29 million, and we'd be thrilled that we got 2 million people on a Saturday night. And Mellenby would walk in and say, "What are the other 26 million doing? We've got to find a way to get to the other 26 million, because we can get 2 million anytime we want." Yeah. So how do you make it so that people can understand the sport and the game at a level that they want to come back and have fun?
John,
not gap controls, not active sticks. I mean, I used to have a glossary of things. Please don't use these. Please do not use these words, because I don't think people understand it.
Yeah.
John, your baseline of having an opinion would have certainly helped, but I'm fascinated by the transition to the other side of the camera. What would have been some of the benefits to have been in the big chair at the other side, and did you catch yourself kind of having to remind yourself that, there is a producer now that is going to be trying to help you and tell you what to do when you became an analyst on camera?
It was hard. At the same time, I did think that I was... The only problem, Kenny, with that was that very early in, when I did go on the air, the producer would come in and say, "What do you want to talk about?" Dave Hodge again.
Right.
Opened the door. Then I'd literally pull out of my pocket 5 recipe cards of ideas. Okay, we could talk about this, we could talk about this, we could talk about this, we could talk about this. That's all I would do. If he came and said, "We're going to talk about this," I'd say, "Fine, let's go." But if he ever walked in and said, "Well, what do you guys want to talk about?" the recipe cards came out. So I do think that, but it also goes back to, when you got a young producer, and he's I had producers come up to me and say, "You're an urban legend." And so that means, oh Christ, now I'm in trouble because I haven't said anything, and he's going to think I'm trying to run the show. I wasn't trying to run the show. I didn't want to run the show. I just wanted to get me my 30 seconds to finish my story. That's all I wanted. There were times that I would say, hey, why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? I'm not saying don't do it. I said, why are we doing it? Well, this and this and this. Okay, well, think about this. Oh, good idea. Or, you know what? Good point. But it was probably hard on them. It wasn't that hard on me because being an announcer is much easier than being a producer. Much easier. Oh, this is stealing. This is stealing money compared to the 24/7. Come on, come on. It was a great transition for me. It was so much fun. It doesn't happen very often in anybody's life that you get to fulfill your childhood dream at 54. At 54 years old. So I've enjoyed it. I've loved it. I've had so much fun doing it. I still love doing it. I hope to do. I don't want to work past 70, but I'd love to do it for 4 more years and have a good time.
I love that you took a star turn, right? Hopped in from behind the scenes, jumped in front of the camera, because here you're a person who, walked into the business, inherited a bunch of stars, made them better, but over your career, you also found a bunch of stars and created stars from the ground up. I'm interested in your take on, and maybe you can give me some examples. That you already talked about thinking Dick Irvin was the best, but give me an example of what you looked for, the star quality that you looked for in the people that you worked with, and give me an idea of whether or not that could be created or if people walked in and had
it. People walked in and had it. I'd like to say, we created, but we didn't. What we did was we created parameters for them to work in. Like, don't just come on and speak. Speak within this structure and format, and know that the end of that little black mark at the end of a sentence is a period. So when you get to the point where you period, you stop talking. But you can see it. You can see it a mile away. I remember sitting at a bar in 1987 in Calgary. The St. Louis Blues had just been eliminated by the Flames in the Western Conference Final on their way to 86. So it's 86 on their way to their first cup run, and they lost to Montreal. And I'm sitting there having a beer, and a guy beside me sits down, orders a beer. And 90 minutes later, Greg Millen and I have decided he's going to be an announcer. Fast forward to even before that, 1979, in a dressing room in Montreal. I have to do I'm trying to earn a living doing other stuff. I have to go in and do a post-game interview for a radio station. And the starting goalie for the New York Rangers says he'll do the interview, but he has to have a shower. So come on into the shower. And I'm standing there. I've got my tape recorder. My hand is in the shower and my baby blue blazers is soaked up to the shoulder. And I'm doing an interview with John Davidson. We've been lifelong friends since.
Yeah.
1989, Kelly Rudy's the goalie for the Los Angeles Kings, but he's got the flu, so they won't let him fly on the charter. So he flies commercial and sits beside me on the plane. By the time he gets off the plane, I've decided that when push comes to shove and we need an announcer for Hockey Night in Canada, we're going to hire Kelly Rudy. So it's a gut, but you can see it in their eyes. You can feel it in their discussion. They're warm people. They have a passion for the game to be great, and they can talk about it without stumbling. So you end up being a hockey scout, right? It's like being a hockey scout. The eye test. This guy's good. He's got a chance, and that's how I've done it most of the time.
Certainly interesting too, John. I mean, obviously you do a popular podcast as well with Bob McCown. I mean, what's it been like to sort of transition into that space? After all those years on prime time.
I think it's better for both of us in that, when we were doing the 2-hour version, because I would only ever do 2 hours max with Bob. Bob would do the first hour himself. And it would be 6 guests in 2 hours. Well, we've morphed to 1 guest in 48 minutes. and you can really have a lot more time and depth to do what the three of us have done here, and you get better answers. And I think and Bob is so good at simple, straightforward questions, and he, like a guy like Hodge, he's so revered by most people that they'll always want to come on and want to be with McCowan. That I think it's worked out great. We've now done about 370 episodes. We go Monday to Friday every day. Like I just finished before I did you. We just finished today's show, and it'll be posted. It goes on Sirius XM at 5 o'clock in Winnipeg, and then it gets posted on all the platforms seconds after that. So I think it's been great. In many ways it was, and I think maybe for you guys too, in doing this, is during the pandemic, it was a sanity play. Mm-hmm. I had a reason to get up in the morning. Well, I got to do the podcast. Otherwise you'd be lying in bed and rolling over, and then, no, got to get up. And I think the interesting thing about the podcast for me too is that we don't really have a producer, but with the phone books that we have, they'd be able to just say, hey, listen, can you do next Tuesday? And everybody says yes. So we have a great rotation of guys that come on, that want to come on. And it's simple to do, as you guys know. It's fun to do. And you don't have to leave your house.
John, there's so much that we're not even going to come close to touching with you in your career. I know you're a big Olympics guy. I was told you were the main force behind the Lillehammer Olympics. You've won, I believe, Emmys working for NBC. You invented the ankle cam, I'm told. I'm told Hockey Day in Canada is your baby, which is really the offshoot of any kind of grassroots show, hometown hockey, which we do now, Craft Hockeyville, all these things, which is basically about connecting with the audience at the grassroots. Give me an idea of what you look back at, and please, if you want to be exhaustive, but what are the things that you brought to hockey broadcasting, not just hockey broadcasting, Olympic broadcasting in general, that you're most proud of and you think most revolutionized the industry? Because everyone around you talks about how you have revolutionized this industry.
Well, I don't think I've revolutionized it. I think I tweaked it. I mean, the technology and the business is so much better now than it was when I started. So it's we did a Stanley Cup final with 7 cameras. Now there's 40. So when I look at things, there's two buckets really. There's the technology stuff that still lives on, like the overhead cameras over the nets. We did that first in the early 1990s, and then brought it to Hockey Night, and then the league adopted it after that. So that to me is near the top of the list from a programming perspective. Certainly Hockey Day means a lot to me. It's not the same now as it was then, but just the concept that we take a day to talk about how great this game has been for our country is important. I still think that the best programming that I built, Cherry was already there, so I can't take credit for Don. That was Ralph's baby. But we needed something to do in the next intermission to balance Dawn and to give people a reason to stay around for us. And that was the satellite hot stove.
Satellite hot stove, yeah.
And to me, the satellite hot stove was the best. At that time, it was the genesis of Hockey Insiders.
Yep.
It was the what's going on in the game, around the game. We were on the verge of the internet. We were on the verge of all sports radio. We were on the verge of cable sports networks taking over. It was at a point where Saturday nights were still the anchor of hockey, and Hockey Night was the punctuation mark of the week. So anything can happen Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but then you had we got to wait what Hockey Night says. We have to wait to what Hockey Night says. And we balanced it with Dawn and the hot stove. And to me, the hot stove, the original hot stove, was John Davidson, Jim Houston, and somebody wherever we were hosting the show from, because we didn't do it in the studio in those days. Yeah. And so we had a rotation of people that would jump in. When Houston ended up going to Sportsnet for the national rights holder, we put Al Strachan in that spot.
Yeah,
because I felt we neted some sandpaper.
Yeah,
we needed somebody to be a shit disturber.
Yeah,
and it worked. To me, that programming, but at the same time, you know, I was lucky enough to be in the right spot at the right time. And the guy I worked for at CBC was a guy named Alan Clark, who was a brilliant CBC guy. Gave me the latitude to say, what do you need? I said, well, I'd like a half-hour pregame show. I mean, we have too much programming now. We have a doubleheader. I was lucky enough to be part of helping the doubleheader come to fruition for Hockey Night. So he fought with the network to give us a half-hour pregame show that then we could do those more in-depth features. And that's how Scott Oak got to the show. Scott Oak got there as our national feature reporter, and it was called the Headliner in those days. And this, I don't know if Scotty's been on and told the story, but we would not decide the Headliner until Thursday morning, and it had to be finished for Saturday night. And that show, so that means that Scott and our cameraman and our producer Chris Irwin would be on a plane Thursday morning somewhere. And they would have ideas, and then I would say, no, we're going to do this. The whim of the executive producer saying, well, let's go do this. That's cool. That's a better story. And then they'd have to, reroute things. So that was part of it. Just as another little sidebar, the work week for Hockey Night in those days was nice. Certainly you had Saturday night, the doubleheader. So you had Sunday off, go in for half day Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Tuesday, Wednesday were regular work days. Thursday was an 18-hour day. Friday was an 18-hour day, and then you back to game day. If I ever left the office on Friday to drive home, I would drive home on Friday nights to have dinner with my family and then come back to the office. The whole staff cringed when I got in my car, because I would get stuck in traffic on the Gardiner Expressway in Toronto, and I'd have 12 ideas. And the next thing you know, I'm phoning back to the office saying, we should do this. I'm going to phone this guy. Let's get a satellite truck over here. And that's how the show, that's where, what I think was that we became the show of record because we created the ability to be nimble. We created the ability to be so in tune with what was going on with the game anywhere in North America. And we could pull it off. At a time when technology isn't as easy as it was today.
We've all been sort of impacted by the way the industry has changed. There have been a lot of cuts and things of that nature, John. But what encourages you about the direction the business is going, and why is there reason to be encouraged?
Well, hey, listen. So when I started, the encouragement for me is that there's 82 Jets games. That 82 Jets games are on television. The first CK&D package was 17 games. There is so much. There's so much broadcasting. There's so much sports. What I would tell you right now, and this is, so the sports fans sitting over here, and the content's over here. The only thing that's changed is how we get it to them. And you know what? We're still learning how to distribute. We are still learning whether it's on Zoom or Twitter or Twitch or Reddit or some social platform that hasn't been invented yet, that will change the gamut of life for all of us. There's more sports fans than ever before. And there's more content than ever before. We just need to find a way to figure out how to get it to them. The next step for all of us in so many ways is April the 4th. April the 4th is when gambling, sports
Yeah.
gambling in our country is legal. You've seen the amount of money that all these companies have spent in promotion. I'm not a gambler. I will never gamble, simply because if I did start to gamble, I would not have a house to live in. And I know that, so I'm not going to do it. But they are injecting so much money into our business that it's going to be driven by content. And that's a positive. There's going to be lots of jobs. There's more jobs coming all the time. And so there's lots of things to be positive about that way. What I don't want my, my national game on any sport, baseball, basketball, football, hockey, riddled with odds and point spreads. I still want to be able to watch the game. People will learn to do that in an unintrusive way, and then we'll be fine. But there's going to be lots of jobs because there's lots of money coming. Lots of money.
John, I just want to say we are so appreciative. Everything that I've heard about you every time I've met you, and the one time I got to work with you at, I think, the 2018 draft in Chicago, everything I've heard is absolutely true. Your thumbprints are all over. Your knowledge is woven in and out of every hockey broadcast we see going forward. And the one thing I absolutely love about your performance, and that's what I'll call it here, your performance on the podcast here today, is that it's so clear how deeply you think about issues, and you did a phenomenal job of explaining and showing the depth of which you tackle issues. And I think it was really, really enlightening for our audience here today. Thank you so much for taking the time.
If I could just leave you with one thing, is most of, and my close friends, every time I say it, they laugh at me. I have two phrases. The first one is, be patient. Things we gotta have. Just be patient. Something's going to happen. It may not be this week. It may have been next month. But just be patient. And the other one is, just use common sense. Use your common sense. I'd like to think that. How long have we been talking? So we were talking for about an hour.
An hour.
Yeah. I think that everything we talked about was common sense. It was just it's logical. Everything was logical. There was nothing that's outrageously creative. It was just everything was common sense. Think about it. Let's think about it. Let's talk through this process, and we can make it happen. We can make it happen to the three of us. We can make it happen with 20 of us. We can make it happen with a crew of 200 at an Olympic Games. We in our business, we make things way too complex. Mm-hmm. It's not that hard. It's a simple business. It really is. And that's when you have to use common sense. I always tell people, and half your audience are going to have to Google the guy, but George Brett always told, he said, when you're in the groove, when you're hitting for the Royals, he says it's like hitting a grapefruit. And I've been blessed. I really have been blessed in this business that I think I see sports and television like a grapefruit. And I'm just lucky.
Yeah. I'm not going to argue with that because you are constantly hitting it out of the park every time you.
We're not done yet, man. We're not done. Come on. I just finished doing the Olympics for the CBC. So.
Yeah. Ken, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, well, my patience is for the next time I get to tee it up at Fairview Mountain, and here's story time in Penticton. Got to get that Young Stars tournament back on track here.
It's coming. It's coming
this year. Yeah.
I don't know what this year, but it's coming back. Because here, the two guys that screwed it up, Kenny, the two guys that screwed it up. The general manager of the Calgary Flames, Brad Treliving, born and raised Penticton, BC. Bob Nicholson, president of the Edmonton Oilers, raised in Penticton, BC. The two guys from Penticton were the guys that screwed it up. Because it was, I went for 10 years. It was one of the great.
Awesome.
Traverse City and Penticton were the two great preseason, rookie tournaments to go to.
John, it means a ton that you took the time to take the time with us here today. I absolutely love working with you when I get on you with you for the OB shows. It's phenomenal. I'm looking forward to to the next time. Thanks so much from us and our audience. We really appreciate it.
And don't forget, tomorrow on CGOB, my morning commentary is going to be on.
Exactly.
I got to give a plug. Those people are very
plug.
kind to me. The guys at OB and Chorus and Global are very kind to me in Winnipeg. So, we try to keep everybody entertained as they drive into work on Sargent Avenue. So,
No doubt you do. Thank you so much, John, and talk to you on the radio next time.
Cheers.
Cheers. Gotta say this, Ken. The one thing that I love about John is I have conversations, with the behind the scenes, the heavyweights of the industry, and he is the heavyweight to the heavyweights, right? And yet he's entirely accessible. The one time I got to work with him in 2018, I'm sure you've got your stories, but it's interesting. He talks about how he could be a little bit edgy and, push people pretty hard. I didn't have that experience. If I hadn't heard those stories, I would have thought that John was just that guy who, seemed to teach you 7 different things in the 2-minute TV spot that you had with him. So great teacher, and absolutely phenomenal. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you are watching hockey on television, you are watching a whole bunch of John's ideas over the years at play. If you're watching sports television, you're watching a bunch of his ideas at play, and yet he's so accessible. The fact that we get to hear him on CJOB radio, I'm not sure people in Winnipeg understand the privilege it is to have that, but boy oh boy, he is something else.
Yeah, and a guy that is very welcoming. Call anytime if you have any questions, and he can help in all kinds of fronts. And yeah, I mean, for me, the year that the Jets came back was just phenomenal. I remember going to that first Young Stars tournament in Penticton. That's when Mark Scheifele had his big breakout. But one of the highlights for me, we have a dinner at an Italian restaurant in Penticton. I'm at a table with John Shannon, Bob McKenzie, Mark Spector, a bunch of the guys around the business, and like some big legends. And the red wine is flowing a little bit, but I mean, the storytelling, that's what it is all about. I mean, when you get to learn and see, and it's just one of those things where it's just good to be able to listen, right? I mean, it's good to have an opinion, but that's one of those situations where if you have your ears open, there's a lot for you to learn. And I really appreciated those times. And I've been fortunate to be on the golf course with John once in a while. And man, it's just an incredible human being. And again, to me, the 2 things stand out about John: incredibly curiosity, obviously, and passion. I mean, this guy absolutely oozes passion when it comes to hockey, when it comes to broadcasting, when it comes to kind of making the world a better place, and in doing it that way. So I'm very fortunate to call John a friend. And again, I haven't worked enough with him to call him a mentor, but I mean, he's just an incredible human being. And that was one of the things Connor Hellebuck would call it, a historical films kind of moment, and it's always fun to be part of those.
Well, gotta say, when you're talking about appreciation, we can't leave out our chat room, who we don't visit into or bring into the show as much on these shows. Although I was thinking about it halfway through, if anyone's going to handle that without getting distracted, it's going to be John Shannon. He's a pro's pro. He could read. He probably read all these comments. I was wondering why we weren't bringing him into the show, because they were great stuff as usual. Thanks for being here with us. People have said it in the chat room. If you want to share this and get this around, we absolutely love these shows. We think there's a ton of value in these shows. A guy like John Shannon, I mean, you learn so much just from listening to him. He sure kind of enlightens the behind the scenes of what's happening with hockey and what you see on camera. So please share far and wide. We really appreciate you doing that. If you haven't clicked subscribe to our page on YouTube, please do that, as well as like our videos every chance you get. And one last push here for us. If you're interested in any Kenny and Renny merchandise, shirts, water bottles, mugs, we've got a ton of stuff at the www.shopsportsnet.store. I got to say, people have been sharing with me the merch that they've bought, sending me pictures. I absolutely love it when you do that. So if you want to keep doing that, it means a ton to us. Send it to us either on Instagram or share it in these channels here or on Twitter. We absolutely love that. Thank you so much for being there. Thank you for supporting Kenny and Renny. It means the world for us. Thank you so much. And we will see you after the post game tomorrow on Friday as the Jets play the Boston Bruins. See you later, everybody.